You watch competitors blindside you with moves you never saw coming, while you're still reacting to yesterday instead of preparing for tomorrow. Every day feels like you're playing catch-up, while others seem to know the rules before they're written. I am Sun Tzu, and I mastered the art of thinking 10 steps ahead to win wars before they even began. What I'll share will transform how you anticipate and outthink everyone around you, using the same principles that let me defeat enemies without fighting. The ancient war council chamber where I first learned strategic thinking still echoes with the voices of generals who thought only one move ahead. They all lost their armies to those who could see the entire campaign before the first battle. Today, whether you're navigating corporate boardrooms or personal relationships, the same principles apply. Those who think furthest ahead control the outcomes. But first, like this video, subscribe for more strategic wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. Let's see which corners of the world are ready to think ahead. I still remember the weight of the original manuscript in my hands, 13 chapters that would change how humanity thinks about conflict forever. The art of war wasn't born in a moment of inspiration, but through years of watching brilliant generals lose battles they should have won, simply because they couldn't see beyond their immediate circumstances. My journey from young officer to master strategist began with a humbling defeat. I was 23, commanding a small force against bandits in the southern provinces. I had superior numbers, better equipment, and the confidence of youth. Yet I walked straight into an ambush because I was thinking like a soldier, not a strategist. While I was focused on how to attack their position, they were already 3 moves ahead, predicting exactly where I would strike and preparing their trap. That night, sitting among my wounded men, I realized that battles are won in the mind before the battlefield. The enemy commander hadn't defeated my army, he had defeated my thinking. He understood something I didn't. Warfare is not about strength or courage, but about mental advantage. The superior general wins by making the enemy's moves predictable, while keeping his own intentions hidden. This revelation changed everything. I began studying not just military tactics, but the patterns of human thought itself. I watched how people made decisions under pressure, how they revealed their intentions through their actions, how they could be guided to defeat themselves. I learned that the mind is the ultimate battlefield, and whoever controls the mental space controls the outcome. Most people think only one move ahead because their minds are trapped in the immediate moment. They see a problem and rush to solve it without considering what their solution will create. They make a move in response to their opponent's last move, always reactive, always behind. But strategic thinking, true strategic thinking, you to see the entire sequence before you make your first move. When I developed my principles, I wasn't just creating military doctrine. I was mapping the architecture of successful thinking itself. Every principle in the art of war is really about expanding your mental horizon, teaching you to see further into the future than your competitors can see. The bamboo grove where I trained my mind still grows in the mountains of Wu, though few remember why it was sacred to the art of strategy. I spent 3 years there, not learning sword techniques or battle formations, but learning to see what others could not see. The bamboo grove became my first teacher in the art of thinking 10 steps ahead. Every morning before dawn, I would sit among the bamboo stalks and watch the wind patterns. At first, I saw only chaos, thousands of bamboo shoots swaying randomly, bending and straightening without apparent purpose. But my master, an old general who had survived 40 campaigns, taught me to look deeper. The bamboo knows where the wind will blow next, he would say. Learn to read what the bamboo reads. Gradually, I began to see the patterns. The wind didn't move. Randomly it flowed in predictable waves across the grove. The bamboo stalks closest to the mountain would bend first. Then the movement would ripple outward in a sequence. By watching the first stalks, I could predict exactly when and how the wind would reach the bamboo near me. The grove became a living map of cause and effect, showing me how one movement creates the next, and the next, and the next. This was my breakthrough moment. I realized that human behavior follows patterns just like the wind. People think their actions are unpredictable, but they're actually following invisible currents of motivation, pressure, and habit. If you can read these currents, you can predict their next move before they've even decided to make it. I began applying this bamboo grove thinking to everything. When negotiating with local governors, I would watch for the subtle signs that revealed their true intentions, the way they positioned themselves, the timing of their words, the things they avoided mentioning. Like the bamboo stalks, these signs would show me which way their thoughts were bending before they acted on them. The greatest lesson the bamboo grove taught me was this: predictive thinking isn't about guessing what will happen. It's about understanding the forces that make things happen. Just as the bamboo doesn't guess when the wind will blow, but feels the pressure changes that precede the wind. Strategic thinking means learning to feel the pressure changes in human situations that precede human actions. Most people wait for others to act, then react to what they see. But by the time you can see someone's action, it's too late to gain advantage. The strategic mind learns to read the signs that come before the action, the subtle indicators that reveal what someone will do before they do it. The bronze mirror I used for daily reflection sat on my campaign table for 30 years, its surface polished to perfect clarity, not for vanity, but for the most crucial strategic discipline of all, knowing yourself with brutal honesty. This mirror became my most trusted advisor, the one counselor who would never flatter me or tell me what I wanted to hear. Every morning, I would look into that mirror and ask myself the hard questions. What are my true capabilities today? Where am I strong and where am I weak? What am I afraid of that I haven't admitted? What assumptions am I making that might be wrong? The mirror reflected not just my face, but my self-deceptions, my blind spots, my hidden weaknesses that enemies would exploit if I didn't address them first. I learned this discipline the hard way. Early in my career, I convinced myself I was naturally gifted at reading people's intentions. I believed my instincts were infallible, that I could sense deception in any negotiation. This confidence led me into a trap that nearly destroyed my reputation. A rival general, knowing of my supposed gift, fed me carefully crafted false information. Through intermediaries, I detected the deception in his obvious lies but missed the subtle truth hidden within them. My overconfidence in my abilities made me vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation I thought I was immune to. That failure taught me the foundation of all strategic thinking. You cannot think ahead of others if you don't know exactly where you stand. Self-knowledge isn't about listing your strengths and weaknesses. It's about understanding your patterns, your reflexes, your unconscious habits that others can predict and exploit. I developed specific methods for maintaining this self-awareness. Each evening, I would review the day's decisions and ask, what did I assume? What did I miss? When did I react instead of respond? Where did my emotions override my judgment? Tracked my decision-making patterns like a hunter tracks animal behavior, looking for the consistent mistakes that would become my downfall if left uncorrected. The bronze mirror taught me that strategic blindness comes not from external deception, but from internal self-deception. When you don't know your own mind, you can't predict how others will manipulate it. When you don't understand your own motivations, you can't see how others will use them against you. When you don't recognize your own patterns, you can't anticipate how others will exploit them. Most people avoid this kind of honest self-examination because it's uncomfortable. They prefer to believe they're naturally good at strategy, that their instincts are reliable, that their judgment is sound. But comfort is the enemy of strategic thinking. The general who cannot see his own weaknesses will have them used against him by the general who can. The silk scroll containing my intelligence network's reports was never far from my side during campaigns. Woven with symbols that only my spies understood, it contained the most valuable commodity in warfare, information about my enemies that they didn't know I possessed. This scroll represented years of careful cultivation, turning the enemy's own people into my eyes and ears. Building comprehensive understanding of your competition requires more than casual observation. It demands systematic intelligence gathering, the kind that reveals not just what people do, but why they do it, when they're likely to do it again, and how they'll react when pressured. I developed 5 categories of intelligence that matter most in any strategic situation. First, I needed to understand their resources, not just their obvious strengths, but their hidden capabilities and their true limitations. Most people make the mistake of judging others by what they display publicly, but the shrewd competitor hides their best assets while exaggerating their weaknesses. I learned to look beyond the surface to find the real source of their power. Second, I studied their patterns of decision-making. Everyone has a signature style of thinking under pressure. Some people become aggressive when threatened, others withdraw. Some make quick decisions, others hesitate. Some seek consensus, others act unilaterally. By understanding these patterns, I could predict their responses to different situations and plan accordingly. Third, I analyzed their relationships and alliances. No one operates in isolation. Understanding who influences your competitor, who they trust, who they fear, and who they're trying to impress gives you insight into their likely moves. I once defeated a much larger army simply by understanding that their general was desperate to prove himself to his father-in-law, making him predictably aggressive at exactly the wrong moment. Fourth, I identified their fears and insecurities. What keeps them awake at night? What failure do they most want to avoid? What success do they most desperately need? These psychological pressure points become strategic levers when properly understood. People will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid their deepest fears, even when it's strategically foolish. Fifth, I mapped their information sources. Who tells them what they know? How do they verify information? What are their blind spots? By understanding how your competitors gather and process information, you can influence what they believe without them knowing you're doing it. The key to gathering this intelligence is patience and subtlety. Most people are eager to share information about themselves if you know how to listen. They reveal their priorities through their complaints, their fears through their defensive reactions, their plans through their casual comments about the future. The art is in creating situations where they feel safe to reveal these things naturally. I trained my network to become invisible listeners, people who could be present during important conversations without being noticed as threats. A servant who brings tea, a merchant who provides supplies, a minor official who handles routine paperwork. These people hear everything while being seen as nobody important. But remember, while you're gathering intelligence about others, they may be gathering intelligence about you. The same principles work in reverse. Never assume your private conversations are private, your weaknesses are hidden, or your plans are secret. The strategic mind operates on the assumption that someone is always watching, always listening, always planning to use what they learn against you. I kept a smooth river stone on my campaign table, worn perfectly round by decades of flowing water. This stone taught me one of the most important lessons in strategic thinking. Water never fights the rock, yet water always wins. The stone reminded me that the most powerful strategies are not the most forceful, but the most adaptable. Early in my military career, I made the mistake of rigid planning. I would develop elaborate strategies with every detail mapped out, then become frustrated when reality didn't match my plans. I was like a general trying to make the river flow uphill, technically possible with enough force, but wasteful and ultimately futile. The breakthrough came when I learned to think like water itself. Water has a destination. It always flows toward the sea, but it never fights unnecessary battles to get there. When water encounters a mountain, it doesn't crash against it repeatedly. Instead, it finds the path of least resistance, flows around the obstacle, and continues toward its goal. Sometimes this means taking a longer route, but water always reaches its destination while the mountain eventually crumbles. I learned to apply this principle to every strategic situation. When facing a strong opponent, I wouldn't attack their strength directly. Instead, I would flow around it, finding the weak points, the gaps in their defenses, the places where my force could penetrate without triggering massive resistance. This wasn't cowardice, was efficiency. Why break down a fortress wall when you can slip through an unguarded gate? The water strategy taught me the crucial balance between planning and spontaneous response. Water has a clear direction, it knows where it's going, but it adapts its path moment by moment, based on the terrain it encounters. Similarly, strategic thinking requires a clear ultimate objective combined with complete tactical flexibility about how to achieve it. During one particularly challenging campaign, I faced an enemy general who had studied my previous battles and prepared counters for my usual strategies. Every move I made, he anticipated. Every strength I deployed, he neutralized. It was like fighting my own shadow. That's when I remembered the river stone and changed my approach entirely. Instead of trying to execute a predetermined plan, I began to flow like water around his preparations. When he reinforced his left flank, expecting my usual attack pattern, I shifted to probe his center. When he moved to defend his center, I flowed toward his supply lines. I never committed to any single approach long enough for him to mount a complete defense. Like water finding the cracks in a stone, I found the momentary weaknesses in his constantly shifting defenses. The key insight was this: rigid thinking destroys strategic advantage because it makes you predictable. When your opponents can anticipate your moves, they can prepare counters. But when you maintain the fluidity of water, keeping your ultimate goal constant while adapting your methods continuously, you become unpredictable and therefore unstoppable. This principle applies beyond warfare. In business, relationships, or any competitive situation, the most successful people are those who combine clear objectives with flexible methods. They know where they want to go, but they're willing to change how they get there based on changing circumstances. They flow around obstacles instead of fighting them, conserving their energy for the battles that truly matter. Most people either plan too rigidly or react too chaotically. The water strategy offers a third path: purposeful adaptability. Like water, you can be both gentle and irresistible, both flexible and persistent, both accommodating and unstoppable. The topographical war map I carried into every campaign was more than paper and ink. It was my window into victory before the battle began. Every hill, valley, river, and road told a story about who would have the advantage and who would fall. I learned to read the landscape like a scholar reads ancient texts, finding the hidden meanings that determined outcomes. Most generals looked at terrain and saw only obstacles or opportunities. I learned to see the entire strategic ecosystem. High ground wasn't just about visibility, was about morale, communication, and the psychological advantage of fighting downhill. Rivers weren't just barriers, they were predictors of where enemies would mass, where supplies would flow, where retreat routes would form. I remember studying the terrain before the Battle of Buyu, where I faced an army twice my size. On the surface, the battlefield seemed to favor the larger force-open plains, where they could deploy their superior numbers. But my map revealed something others missed: the seasonal flooding patterns. The rains would come in 3 days, and when they did, the low-lying areas where they planned to position their cavalry would become impassable marsh. I positioned my forces on slightly higher ground that appeared disadvantageous looked like I was conceding the best positions to the enemy, but I knew something they didn't. In 3 days, their superior position would become a trap. When the rains came, their mobility vanished, while mine remained intact. I won a battle against superior numbers by reading the terrain for days into the future. This principle applies to every competitive environment. In business, you must understand the landscape of your industry, the regulatory changes coming, the technological shifts happening, the economic pressures building. Most people see only the current state of the market, but strategic thinking requires seeing the forces that will reshape that market. Understanding environmental factors means identifying the high ground in your situation. In a corporate environment, high ground might be key relationships, exclusive information, or strategic partnerships. In negotiations, it might be superior preparation, better alternatives, or deeper understanding of the other party's constraints. The terrain analysis taught me to look for positional advantages that others overlook. Sometimes the best position isn't the most obvious one. Sometimes accepting apparent disadvantages in one area gives you decisive advantages in another. The art is in seeing the whole system and positioning yourself where the changing environment will work in your favor. Most people position themselves reactively, responding to current conditions, but strategic positioning means anticipating how those conditions will change and being positioned to benefit from those changes. Like choosing the high ground before the battle. The key is to secure your advantageous position before others realize it's advantageous. The false battle standard I carried into campaigns was identical to my real one in every detail, except for one crucial difference: it was designed to be captured. When enemy spies inevitably reported my position based on where they saw my standard, they would be giving their generals exactly the wrong information. This principle of strategic deception became the foundation of my greatest victories. All warfare is based on deception, but not the kind most people imagine. I'm not talking about lies or dishonesty. I'm talking about the art of making your moves unpredictable while making your opponent's moves predictable. True strategic deception means controlling what others believe about your intentions, capabilities, and next moves. The first level of deception is appearing weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. When I had overwhelming force, I would make my army appear smaller by hiding troops, using indirect approach routes, and avoiding displays of strength. This encouraged enemy aggression at precisely the wrong moment. When I was actually weak, I would create the illusion of strength through careful positioning, strategic noise, and visible preparations that suggested capabilities I didn't possess. During the siege of Ying, I faced a fortified city with limited supplies and time. Direct assault would have been costly, and I couldn't afford a long siege. Instead, I began elaborate preparations for a siege that would last months: building permanent camps, establishing supply lines, and conducting engineering surveys. To outside observers, I appeared to be settling in for a lengthy campaign. But while my visible preparations suggested a long siege, my real plan was the opposite. I was using the appearance of patience to mask rapid preparation for a decisive strike. While the defenders relaxed, believing they had months to prepare, I was actually preparing to attack within days. The deception wasn't about hiding my intentions. It was about making my timing unpredictable. The deeper principle here is that people make decisions based on what they believe, not what is actually true. If you can influence what your competitors believe about your situation, you can influence their decisions. If they believe you're weak, they'll act aggressively and expose themselves. If they believe you're strong, they'll act defensively and limit their options. Strategic deception requires understanding how your opponents gather and process information. What signals do they pay attention to? What assumptions do they make? What patterns do they expect? Once you understand their information gathering habits, You can feed them carefully crafted information that leads them to the conclusions you want them to reach. The ethical application of this principle doesn't require dishonesty. In business negotiations, you might emphasize certain aspects of your situation while downplaying others. In competitive situations, you might reveal your strengths in one area while keeping your strengths in other areas private. The key is never giving your opponents complete information about your true position. Remember, while you're practicing strategic deception, others are doing the same to you. Always assume that some of what you believe about your competition is deliberately misleading. The strategic mind operates with healthy skepticism about information that comes to isolate or confirms what you already want to believe. The war drum that coordinated my armies wasn't just an instrument, it was the heartbeat of victory itself. Its rhythm taught my forces the supreme importance of timing in strategic execution. In warfare, as in all competition, the difference between success and failure often comes down to a single moment, and your ability to recognize and seize that moment faster than your opponent. Timing in strategy has two crucial elements: when to wait and when to strike. Most people understand neither. They either act too quickly before the conditions are right, or they hesitate too long and miss the moment entirely. I learned that strategic timing is like music. It requires feeling the rhythm of the situation and knowing exactly when to enter. I remember a campaign where I spent 6 months in apparent inactivity, watching and waiting while my advisors grew impatient. The enemy general had positioned his forces well, and any direct attack would have been costly. But I could sense the rhythm of his army, the patterns of their patrols, the cycles of their vigilance, the gradual erosion of their readiness that comes with prolonged inactivity. For 6 months, I watched for the right moment. Then, during their harvest festival, when I knew their attention would be divided and their guards reduced, I struck with devastating speed. What they expected to take weeks happened in hours. By the time they realized what was happening, the battle was already over. 6 months of patience had compressed into 6 hours of decisive action. This taught me that true speed isn't about moving fast all the time. It's about moving at exactly the right time with overwhelming force. Like a coiled spring, strategic thinking requires periods of compression followed by explosive release. The art is in building up potential energy during the waiting periods and then releasing it at the perfect moment. Speed in execution must be preceded by deliberation in planning. When the moment comes, there's no time for hesitation or second guessing. Every detail must be prepared, every contingency considered, every resource positioned. Then, when the moment arrives, execution becomes a matter of releasing energy that has been carefully stored and aimed. The key to developing intuitive timing is learning to read the rhythms of competition. Every competitive situation has natural cycles, periods of high attention and low attention, times of strength and times of vulnerability, moments of opportunity and moments of danger. Most people are too focused on their own plans to notice these rhythms, but strategic thinking requires feeling the pulse of the entire situation. Hesitation kills strategic advantage because opportunities are fleeting. The moment that gives you overwhelming advantage may last only minutes or hours. If you're not prepared to move when that moment comes, it passes to someone who is. This is why strategic thinking always involves preparation for opportunities that haven't yet appeared. But speed without direction is mere activity. The strategic mind combines rapid execution with careful aim. When you strike, you must strike precisely at the point that will have maximum impact. Random fast action accomplishes nothing. Focused fast action accomplishes everything. The peaceful victory seal I used to mark my greatest triumphs was carved from white jade, reminder that the supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. This seal marked victories that cost no lives, required no battles, yet achieved complete strategic objectives. These were my proudest accomplishments, the ones that proved strategy superior to force. The supreme skill is not winning 100 battles, but subduing the enemy without battle. This principle revolutionized my approach to conflict and remains the most misunderstood aspect of strategic thinking. Most people believe that competition requires direct confrontation, that winning means defeating others through superior force. But the indirect approach achieves objectives by making resistance futile rather than overcoming it through strength. I once faced a rebellious province whose governor had declared independence and fortified his capital. A direct assault would have required months of siege, thousands of casualties, and enormous expense. Instead, I studied what this governor truly wanted: legitimacy, respect, and security for his family line. Rather than attacking his defenses, I attacked his motivations. Through intermediaries, I offered him a path to achieve his real objectives without rebellion. I proposed a face-saving compromise where he could maintain authority over his province while acknowledging central government oversight. I addressed his concerns about his family's future and his own legacy. Most importantly, I demonstrated that continued resistance would ultimately destroy everything he was trying to protect. The key was understanding that his rebellion wasn't really about independence, it was about fear. Fear that he would be replaced, that his family would lose status, that his life's work would be dismissed. By addressing the underlying fears, rather than fighting the surface rebellion, I achieved my objectives without bloodshed. He surrendered voluntarily because I made it the most attractive option available to him. This approach works because most conflict stems from misaligned interests rather than truly incompatible objectives. When you can restructure a situation so that achieving your goals also helps others achieve theirs, resistance disappears. Instead of fighting over a limited resource, you expand the resource or find alternative ways for everyone to win. Indirect approach requires deeper thinking than direct confrontation. You must understand not just what your opponents are doing, but why they're doing it. You must see not just their actions, but their underlying motivations, fears, and true objectives. Once you understand these deeper drivers, you can often achieve your goals by helping them achieve theirs. In business negotiations, this might mean finding creative solutions that give both parties what they actually need, rather than fighting over what they initially demanded. In workplace conflicts, it might mean addressing the underlying insecurities or concerns that are driving the surface disagreement. In competitive situations, it might mean changing the rules of the game so that your natural advantages become decisive. The psychological power of the indirect approach is enormous. When people feel they're choosing freely rather than being forced, they commit more fully to the outcome. When they believe the solution serves their interests, they become advocates rather than opponents. When resistance seems futile, not because of your strength, but because of the inherent logic of the situation, they stop resisting. This strategy requires patience and sophistication. It's easier to use force than to restructure situations. It's simpler to fight than to think your way around conflict. But the indirect approach creates lasting solutions because it addresses root causes rather than symptoms. When you win without fighting, you've truly won. My command staff represented more than military hierarchy, was a living system for unified strategic execution. Every member understood not just their role, but how their role connected to every other role in achieving our objectives. This wasn't about rigid control, but about creating coherent strategic direction that aligned all resources toward common goals. The chaos of conflicting strategies destroys more armies than enemy action. I learned this during my early campaigns when I made the mistake of allowing multiple generals to pursue separate objectives simultaneously. Each general's plan was sound individually, but together they created confusion, wasted resources, and provided opportunities for enemies to exploit our divided attention. One particular disaster taught me this lesson permanently. I had given 3 subordinate commanders independent authority to use their judgment in pursuing what they thought best for the overall campaign. The result was catastrophic. One commander focused on capturing territory, another on destroying enemy supplies, and the third on protecting our own supply lines. Each goal was worthy, but their separate pursuits meant we accomplished none of them effectively. The enemy general, recognizing our divided focus, simply moved his forces to exploit the gaps between our 3 separate strategies, while my commanders were pursuing their individual objectives. He concentrated his entire force against each of our divided efforts in sequence. What should have been our superior numbers became his local superiority at each point of contact. This failure taught me that strategic thinking must be singular at the top level. Even when execution involves multiple people and approaches, there can be many tactics, but there must be one strategy. There can be many methods, but there must be one mission. There can be many voices in planning, but there must be one voice in command. Unity of command doesn't mean micromanagement or authoritarian control. It means ensuring that every action taken by anyone in your organization serves the same strategic purpose. It means creating systems where people can exercise creativity and initiative while maintaining alignment with overall objectives. I developed specific practices for maintaining this unity. Every morning, key commanders would gather to understand not just their tasks for the day, but how those tasks fitted into the larger strategic picture. Every evening, we would review not just what had been accomplished, but what those accomplishments meant for our next strategic moves. Most importantly, I learned to communicate not just what I wanted done, but why it needed to be done. When people understand the strategic reasoning behind their orders, they can adapt those orders intelligently when circumstances change. When they understand only the specific task, they become rigid and lose effectiveness when situations evolve. This principle applies beyond military campaigns. In any complex endeavor involving multiple people, success depends on strategic alignment. Whether you're managing a business team, coordinating a family decision, or working with partners on a project, you need systems that ensure everyone's efforts reinforce rather than contradict each other. The key is creating shared understanding of the ultimate objective while allowing flexibility in how people contribute to that objective. People need to know not just their role, but how their role connects to everyone else's role, and why all the roles together achieve something none could accomplish alone. The signal fire network that coordinated my most decisive campaigns stretched across hundreds of miles, allowing instant communication for concentrated strikes. These fires represented more than communication. They embodied the principle of overwhelming force applied at the decisive point. When conditions were perfect, every available resource would converge like flames, consuming dry grass. Most people misunderstand the concept of overwhelming force. They think it means having more resources than your opponent overall. But strategic force means concentrating superior resources at the critical point, even when you're weaker overall. It's not about having more wits, about bringing more to bear where it matters most. I learned this principle during a campaign where I faced an enemy with 3 times my total strength. In any direct confrontation across the entire front, I would lose decisively, but I realized that his superior numbers were also his weaknesses, were spread across a wide area, defending multiple positions simultaneously. While he was stronger everywhere, he wasn't overwhelmingly stronger anywhere. I concentrated my entire force against one segment of his line, the position that, if taken, would make all his other positions untenable. At that crucial point, I achieved 3-1 superiority even though I was outnumbered 3-1 overall. The breakthrough was swift and decisive. Once I controlled that key position, his entire defensive system collapsed, and his superior numbers became irrelevant. This taught me that strategic thinking identifies the pressure points where concentrated effort produces disproportionate results. In any complex situation, there are leverage points where a relatively small force can create massive change. The art is in finding these points and having the discipline to concentrate your resources there rather than spreading them everywhere. The principle applies beyond warfare. In business, it might mean focusing all your marketing resources on the customer segment most likely to drive word-of-mouth growth, rather than trying to reach everyone equally. In personal development, it might mean concentrating on the one skill that will most accelerate your progress, rather than trying to improve everything simultaneously. But overwhelming force requires perfect timing. Resources concentrated too early waste away, while waiting for the decisive moment. Resources concentrated too late arrive after the opportunity has passed. The signal fire network taught me to coordinate concentration so that maximum force arrived at maximum opportunity simultaneously. The psychology of overwhelming force is as important as its practical effects. When people see irresistible momentum building, they often surrender before actual contact. When they recognize that resistance is futile, they stop resisting. The appearance of overwhelming force can be as effective as overwhelming force itself, provided it's credible and properly timed. I also learned when not to apply overwhelming force. Sometimes a show of strength is counterproductive, creating unnecessary resistance or destroying what you're trying to capture. Sometimes gradual pressure is more effective than sudden assault. The strategic mind knows not just how to concentrate force, but when concentration serves the objective and when it doesn't. The key insight is that overwhelming force is not about having unlimited resources. It's about using limited resources with such concentration and timing that they become irresistible at the decisive moment. Even small forces can be overwhelming when properly focused and applied. The secret code cipher I developed for my intelligence network remained unbroken for 30 years, protecting the most valuable strategic asset of all information that others didn't know I possessed. This cipher represented the culmination of my understanding that warfare is fundamentally about information advantage. Whoever knows more and knows it first controls the outcome. I classified 5 types of intelligence agents, each serving a different strategic purpose. Local spies were natives of enemy territory who could blend invisibly into their environment. Internal spies were enemy officials who had been turned to serve my interests. Converted spies were enemy agents whom I had captured and persuaded to work for me. Doomed spies were those who carried false information to the enemy, knowing they would likely be discovered and killed. Surviving spies were those who could penetrate enemy territory and return with critical intelligence. But the sophistication of my network went beyond these categories. I learned that information warfare operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The first level is gathering fact troop movements, supply situations, defensive preparations. The second level is understanding intentions, what the enemy plans to do with their current resources. The third level is influencing beliefs controlling what the enemy thinks they know about your situation. During the campaign against Chu, I used all 5 types of agents in a coordinated deception that changed the course of the war. My local spies reported accurate information about Chu defensive positions. My internal spies, well placed in their command structure, fed me details about their strategic planning. My converted spies carried carefully crafted false information back to their original masters. My doomed spies were sacrificed carrying disinformation that made the Chu generals believe I was planning an attack in the south. Meanwhile, my surviving spies brought me intelligence about the northern routes that I used for my actual attack. The beauty of this system was that each type of agent confirmed the other's information from the enemy's perspective. When multiple sources told the Chu commanders the same full story about my southern attack, they believed it completely. They repositioned their forces accordingly, leaving the North vulnerable to my real assault. But intelligence gathering isn't just about enemy capabilities. It's about protecting your own secrets while uncovering theirs. Every piece of information you share gives your opponents insight into your thinking, your capabilities, and your intentions. I learned to treat every conversation, every document, every visible preparation as potential intelligence for my enemies. The ethics of strategic information gathering focus on understanding rather than harm. In modern applications, this means researching your competition thoroughly, understanding their public statements and actions, analyzing their patterns and tendencies. It means being aware of what information you're revealing through your own actions and communications. Building networks of insight in today's world might involve cultivating relationships with people who interact with your competitors, staying connected with former colleagues who move between organizations, or simply being a careful observer of public information that others ignore. The key principle remains unchanged. Information advantage determines strategic advantage. The side that knows more about the true situation, while keeping their own situation opaque, maintains the initiative. But remember, while you're gathering intelligence about others, assume they're doing the same about you. The strategic mind operates on the assumption that someone is always watching, always listening, always trying to understand your next move before you make it. The pressure point chart I kept in my private quarters mapped the critical vulnerabilities of every opponent I faced at not just their military weaknesses, but their psychological pressure points, their political constraints, their personal fears. This chart taught me that victory comes not from attacking strength, but from finding the weak point that collapses entire systems. Every complex system, whether an army, a business, or a person, has critical vulnerabilities. These aren't necessarily obvious weaknesses. They're the points where pressure applied precisely can create disproportionate results. Like an acupuncturist who knows that touching one specific point can affect the entire body, the strategic mind learns to identify the leverage points where focused pressure produces systemic change. I discovered this principle during my confrontation with the warlord of Key, who commanded superior forces and controlled better territory. His army was well trained, well supplied, and well positioned. Direct assault would have been suicidal. But through careful observation, I identified his critical vulnerability, his desperate need to maintain the loyalty of 3 key subordinate generals whose support kept his coalition together. These generals weren't inherently loyal to him, they were pragmatically aligned because he offered them the best deal. Each controlled territory and resources that made them valuable allies but also potential threats. His strength depended entirely on keeping all 3 satisfied simultaneously, which required a delicate balance of rewards and assurances. I didn't attack his armies or his fortifications. Instead, I quietly approached one of these key generals with a better offer, not just material rewards, but something he wanted more than wealth, legitimacy and recognition for his family line. By addressing his deeper motivations rather than just his immediate interests, I created doubt about his continued alliance with the warlord. The beauty was that I didn't need this general to actually switch sides. I just needed the warlord to suspect he might. Once suspicion entered the warlord's mind, he began acting defensively toward his own allies. His attempts to secure their loyalty through additional rewards and constraints actually pushed them toward the very disloyalty he feared. The entire coalition collapsed from internal suspicion without a single battle. The warlord's greatest strength, his alliance system, became his downfall. When pressure was applied at exactly the right psychological point, this taught me that critical weaknesses often hide within apparent strengths. The manager who micromanages because they fear losing control creates the very inefficiency they're trying to prevent. The business that grows rapidly without building systems creates the instability that threatens its growth. The person who tries to control every aspect of their life often loses control of what matters most. Finding these pressure points requires understanding systems thinking. You must see not just individual elements, but how they connect to each other. What does this organization really depend on? What relationships are critical but fragile? What assumptions, if proven wrong, would force complete strategic recalculation? But while you're identifying others' weak points, you must protect your own. Every strength you possess creates corresponding vulnerabilities. Your best people might be recruited away. Your most profitable products might be disrupted by innovation. Your greatest advantages might become disadvantages if circumstances change. The strategic mind operates with this paradox. Aggressively exploit others' weak points while carefully protecting your own, knowing that today's strength might be tomorrow's vulnerability. The battlefield formation scroll I carried contained dozens of positioning diagrams, each showing how to gain decisive advantage through superior placement rather than superior force. These formations taught me that where you fight is often more important than how you fight. Strategic positioning determines the outcome before the actual contest begins. Maneuvering is the art of gaining positional advantage while preventing your opponent from doing the same. It's not about movement for its own sake, but about reaching the most advantageous position while forcing your opponent into the least advantageous one. The side that controls positioning controls the terms of engagement. I learned this lesson during a campaign where I faced an enemy general renowned for his tactical brilliance. In direct combat, his forces consistently outperformed mine. His soldiers were better trained, his officers more experienced, his equipment superior. But I realized that tactical superiority meant nothing if I could control where and when we fought. Instead of seeking battle, I began a campaign of strategic maneuvering. I positioned my forces where he had to come to me rather than where I had to go to him. I chose terrain that negated his advantages while amplifying mine. I timed my movements so that when contact was inevitable, it happened under conditions that favored my strengths over his. The key insight was that he could win any fair fight, so I made sure no fight was fair. Through positioning, I ensured that every engagement happened where his tactical superiority was irrelevant and my strategic advantages were decisive. I never fought his strength directly maneuvered until his strengths couldn't be brought to bear against me. Strategic positioning creates multiple options while limiting your opponent's choices. When you position yourself correctly, you can attack multiple targets while they can only defend one. You can retreat safely while they cannot pursue effectively. You can adapt to changing circumstances while they remain committed to increasingly disadvantageous positions. The art of maneuvering requires understanding not just where you want to be, but how to get there without revealing your intentions. If your opponent recognizes your destination, they can move to intercept you or position themselves to counter your advantage. True maneuvering appears indirect and maintains ambiguity about your ultimate objective until you're in position to achieve it. Modern strategic positioning works the same way. In business, it might mean establishing relationships with key suppliers before your competitors realize those relationships will become critical. In career development, it might mean developing skills that aren't obviously valuable today but will be essential tomorrow. In negotiations, it might mean structuring discussions so that your strongest arguments come last, when they'll have maximum impact. The psychological aspect of positioning is crucial. When people see you gaining positional advantage, they often react emotionally rather than strategically. They rush to prevent you from reaching your position, which opens up opportunities you couldn't have created through direct action. Their attempt to stop your maneuvering often puts them in worse positions than if they had simply allowed it. But maneuvering requires patience and discipline. You must resist the temptation to engage before your positioning is complete. You must maintain strategic mobility when others are pushing you to commit to specific positions. You must think several moves ahead to ensure that your current position leads to even better future positions. Remember that positioning is dynamic. What gives you advantage today might trap you tomorrow. Strategic thinking requires constant awareness of how changing circumstances affect your position and readiness to maneuver again when conditions shift. The situation assessment matrix I developed categorized every strategic scenario into 9 distinct types, each requiring completely different approaches. This matrix saved me from the fatal error of applying the same strategy to different situations, mistake that destroys more campaigns than enemy action. Strategic thinking is not about finding one approach that works everywhere, but about matching your approach precisely to your circumstances. What works in desperate situations destroys you in advantageous ones. What succeeds when you're strong fails when you're weak. What's effective when you have time becomes disastrous when you must act quickly. I classified situations based on 3 critical factors: your relative strength, the urgency of your timeline, and the stakes involved. A situation where you're strong, have time, and the stakes are moderate requires patient, methodical strategy. A situation where you're weak, time is short, and the stakes are life or death demands desperate, aggressive tactics that would be foolish under other circumstances. During my campaign in the southern marshlands, I found myself in what I classified as death ground, a situation where retreat was impossible and defeat meant annihilation. My normal strategic preferences for patience, maneuvering, and indirect approach became liabilities. When you're fighting for survival with no escape route, only desperate aggression can save you. I threw away my usual playbook and adopted tactics I would never use under normal circumstances. I committed my entire force to a single assault, abandoned careful positioning for speed, and chose direct confrontation over clever maneuvering. These tactics succeeded precisely because they were appropriate to the situation. Even though they contradicted my general strategic philosophy, the matrix taught me to recognize when circumstances demanded abandoning my natural inclinations. When you're in a superior position with time to develop your advantage, aggressive tactics waste your superiority. When you're surrounded with no retreat possible, cautious tactics guarantee destruction. The strategic mind adapts its methods to match reality rather than forcing reality to match preferred methods. In modern applications, this means recognizing that startup strategies differ from corporate strategies, crisis management differs from growth management, and competitive markets require different approaches than monopolistic ones. The person who tries to use the same leadership style in every situation will fail in most of them. Reading situational context requires honest assessment of 3 questions. What is my actual position relative to my competition? How much time do I have before I must achieve results? What happens if I fail completely? Your answers to these questions should determine your strategic approach more than your personal preferences or past successes. I learned to monitor these factors constantly because situations change faster than most people realize. What begins as a comfortable position with plenty of time can become desperate circumstances requiring immediate action. The strategic mind must be ready to shift approaches as contexts evolve. But context assessment can be deceiving. Sometimes apparent weakness masks hidden strength. Sometimes artificial urgency is created to pressure you into poor decisions. Sometimes stakes are exaggerated to manipulate your choices. Part of contextual strategy involves questioning whether the situation is actually what it appears to be. The key insight is that there is no universally correct strategy, only strategies that match specific situations correctly. Master strategists don't have one brilliant approach. They have the wisdom to apply different approaches to different circumstances and the flexibility to change approaches when circumstances change. The modern strategic compass I would design today combines all the ancient principles I've shared with contemporary realities that didn't exist in my time. Technology has changed the speed of information and the scale of competition, but human nature and the fundamentals of strategic thinking remain exactly the same. In business, my principles apply directly to competitive advantage. Know yourself means conducting honest assessments of your company's real capabilities, not the ones you wish you had. Know your enemy means understanding your competitor's strategies, weaknesses, and likely next moves. The indirect approach means finding market opportunities that others have overlooked rather than fighting directly for the same customers everyone else wants. I watch modern entrepreneurs make the same mistakes I saw 25 centuries ago. They attack their competitors' strengths directly instead of finding undefended positions. They reveal their strategies too early, giving competitors time to respond. They spread their resources across too many initiatives instead of concentrating force at the decisive point. They react to market changes instead of anticipating them. The successful business leaders I observe use my principles intuitively. They position their companies where future market changes will create advantages. They gather intelligence about industry trends and competitor plans. They build strategic alliances that strengthen their position while weakening rivals. They know when to be patient and when to strike with overwhelming force. Technology and social media have become modern battlefields where strategic thinking determines who wins attention, influence, and market position. The same principles apply. Understand the terrain, control information flow, position yourself advantageously, and think multiple moves ahead. Those who treat social media tactically posting randomly, responding reactively lose to those who approach it strategically. In career development, strategic positioning means building capabilities before they become obviously valuable. It means cultivating relationships before you need them. It means understanding the forces that will reshape your industry and positioning yourself to benefit from those changes, rather than being disrupted by them. Personal relationships benefit from strategic thinking when applied ethically. Understanding others' motivations helps you find win-win solutions to conflicts. Recognizing that most people think only one move ahead lets you anticipate their reactions and plan accordingly. Knowing when to be direct and when to be indirect helps you achieve relationship goals without creating unnecessary resistance. Negotiations showcase strategic thinking principles clearly. Preparation is intelligence gathering, understanding not just what others want, but why they want it, and what alternatives they have. Positioning means structuring discussions so your strongest arguments have maximum impact. Timing means knowing when to make offers, when to apply pressure, and when to create urgency. The key to applying ancient wisdom to modern challenges is recognizing that while the tools change, the underlying patterns remain constant. People still act from still make predictable mistakes under pressure, still reveal their intentions through their actions. Technology amplifies these patterns but doesn't eliminate them. But modern applications require adapting principles to contemporary ethics and legal constraints. Strategic thinking today must consider long-term reputation, regulatory requirements, and social responsibility. The goal is sustainable advantage that creates value for everyone involved, not short-term wins that damage relationships or institutions. Building strategic thinking as a daily habit means constantly asking yourself, what are the forces shaping my situation? What are my real options versus my apparent options? What are others likely to do next? And how can I position myself to benefit regardless? How can I achieve my objectives while helping others achieve theirs? The most common mistake I see in modern strategic thinking is the obsession with speed over depth. Yes, markets move faster today, but that makes strategic thinking more important, not less important. When everyone else is reacting quickly to surface events, the person who takes time to understand deeper patterns gains enormous advantage. Another modern mistake is confusing information with intelligence. Having access to vast amounts of data doesn't automatically create strategic insight. The strategic mind learns to filter information for what actually matters, to see patterns others miss, and to focus on the signals that predict future changes rather than the noise that describes current conditions. Social media creates particular challenges for strategic thinking because it rewards immediate reaction over thoughtful response. The platform algorithms favor quick, emotional content over deep, strategic analysis. But this creates opportunities for those who maintain strategic discipline, while others are reacting to every trending topic. You can focus on building lasting advantage. The Master's final lesson scroll contains the culmination of everything. I learned about thinking 10 steps ahead of everyone else. After 30 years of campaigns and a lifetime of strategic thinking, this scroll holds the essential wisdom for your journey from reactive thinking to strategic mastery. Strategic thinking is not a talent you're born with. It's a discipline you develop through deliberate practice. Like learning to play music or mastering a craft, it requires daily attention, constant refinement, and the humility to learn from both successes and failures. Every situation becomes an opportunity to strengthen your strategic muscles. Begin by developing the habit of strategic pause. Before reacting to any situation, ask yourself, what are the forces behind what I'm seeing? What are the likely second and third-order effects of different responses? What are others probably thinking and planning? This pause transforms you from reactive to responsive, from tactical to strategic. Practice scenario thinking daily. When you face any decision, mentally play out multiple possible futures. If I choose option A, what happens next? If others respond as expected, what's my follow-up move? If they respond unexpectedly, what are my alternatives? This mental rehearsal prepares you for the actual execution when the moment comes. Build your personal intelligence network, not for spying, but for understanding. Cultivate relationships with people who see different aspects of your competitive environment. Stay connected with former colleagues who move to other organizations. Read widely to understand trends that might affect your situation. The goal is to see the larger picture that others miss because they're focused only on their immediate concerns. Develop the discipline of strategic documentation. Keep a record of your predictions and the reasoning behind them. Track which of your assessments prove accurate and which prove wrong. Analyze your decision-making patterns to identify blind spots and unconscious biases. This systematic self-examination accelerates your strategic development. The greatest challenge in strategic thinking is maintaining long-term perspective while handling short-term pressures. Everyone around you will be focused on immediate problems and demanding immediate responses. The strategic mind learns to address urgent matters while never losing sight of important trends and future opportunities. Master the art of strategic patience combined with tactical speed. This means taking time to think through your approach, but executing that approach with decisive action. It means being willing to wait for the right opportunity while being ready to move quickly when that opportunity appears. Remember that strategic thinking is ultimately about serving others while achieving your own objectives. The greatest strategies create value for everyone involved, rather than just transferring value from others to yourself. When you can align your success with others' success, you create sustainable competitive advantages. Your strategic journey will involve constant learning and adaptation. What works in one situation may fail in another. What succeeds at one stage of your development may become limiting at the next stage. The strategic mind remains curious, flexible, and committed to continuous improvement. As you develop these capabilities, you'll find that thinking 10 steps ahead becomes natural rather than forced. You'll start to see patterns and opportunities that others miss. You'll anticipate problems before they become crises, and position yourself for advantages before they become obvious to competitors. The legacy of strategic thinking extends beyond your personal success. As you master these principles, you become capable of helping others think more strategically, of solving complex problems that benefit entire communities, of creating lasting value that outlives your immediate circumstances. This is my final gift to you, the understanding that strategic thinking is not about defeating others, but about elevating everyone, including yourself, to higher levels of achievement and fulfillment. Think 10 steps ahead, not to manipulate the game, but to play it better than anyone imagined possible.